Greetings, heroes. Coach Rick here. Thanks for joining me on our second part of Book Club. Our book of the month is The E-Myth Revisited. I'm glad you're joining us, whether it's at 5 a.m. What's up, 5 a.m. call, or 5:30, 6, any of the other calls we have going, or you're just seeing this on social media. So excited you're here. We're going to get into part two of The E-Myth Revisited. So last week we talked about what the E-Myth was, the entrepreneurial myth, and American small business, and how most small businesses are basically putting themselves out of business by taking on too much. This week, we're going to talk about the Turnkey Revolution, which is a new view of business, kind of the history behind this and where it's going. So let's jump in. The Turnkey Revolution, just to get straight to it, is franchising. So franchising has been around for a long time, but originally it was trade name franchising. And some good examples are Cadillac and Coca-Cola, where they wanted to expand their business, but they didn't necessarily have the capital to do it. So they would sell the use of their trade name for certain areas and maybe have some standards that the franchisees had to meet, some targets, but not necessarily telling them how to run the business, just goals that they had to meet or service level agreements, things like that. And then Mr. Kroc came along and saw this little hamburger stand in California and saw that it was systematized and said, "That's amazing. I want to duplicate that." And he was essentially, or is credited as being the founder of what's called business format franchising, where you're not just getting the name, the brand name recognition or national marketing, but you are getting basically the entire playbook step by step of how to run the business. And that was really revolutionary at the time. So we talked last week about how you're three people. Well, now we're going to talk about how the McDonald's revolution, or this franchise, this business process franchise revolution, changed the way that those different roles would be looked at. So, question to you: what is McDonald's product? And you'd probably argue like French fries, hamburgers. Some people who know me are going to say the McDonald's product is real estate. But what we're going for here, what's relevant, was it was the consistency. So it was the first time that, whether you were in New York or LA, you would get the same exact, not only the same exact product, you're not only getting a Coke, which is supposed to taste the same, or a Cadillac, which is supposed to, be the same car, but you were getting the same experience. And that was what was really, really different. So McDonald's product is what was the first one to create this turnkey operation. And turnkey, think of the idea of like you get in your car right now and you just turn the key on. You don't have to think about all the stuff, and I'm not very good at this stuff, but spark plugs and ignition and all the things that are going on with fuel, and old cars even had a choke and things like that. You don't have to think about that anymore. You just turn the key, or nowadays you press a button and the car just starts. And that's what franchises have become now, whether it's Subway or a McDonald's. A lot of them are food, but they can be other things like FedEx, Kinko's, where basically you just take everything and set it in motion, and it does it. And that's what was really revolutionary. So what we're going to be thinking about and pondering this week is, how do you create your franchise prototype? How do you create a business that works predictably, effortlessly, and profitably every day? And if you want, how do you build a business that works without you so you can live a fuller life? Now, let me preface this by talking about something that came up on our calls yesterday, and that is that you are going to look at creating these different processes, these different things that you do every day, whether it's prospecting or, for me, it's setting up property tours or reviewing documents or social media. Don't get down into the weeds of like, is this something that I want to farm out to other people or not? Because part of this is just being consistent within what you do. You don't have to turn your business into a franchise. But what you want to start doing is creating these SOPs, these standard operating procedures for all of the different functions that you do over and over. So one idea that Jarvis came up with was cold calling. A lot of us in the mastermind groups do cold calling because we're in some kind of sales. And he said, that might be something that you always do yourself. But what can you do to systematize it? Do you have scripts that are actually written down? Trust me, if you are doing cold calls and you're not using scripts, you're missing out, because if you're winging it every time, you're going to miss the mark. You're wasting effort. Every time you make that call, you should be basically just reading a script, and then each time you call, did it work? Did it not? Is there one word I want to change? Or Jarvis gave a great example, your targets. Monday might be your follow-ups from Friday calls, and Tuesday might be your expired listings calls, and Wednesdays might be your referral calls, and Thursdays might be a phone call centered on a specific territory, and maybe Friday is a phone call on a specific type of business. So again, creating very solid systems where it's replicatable, even if you're the one replicating it. So when you sit down at your computer Monday morning, you don't have to sit there and think, okay, who am I supposed to be calling today? You already know, boom, it's written down in a manual. No thought, no nothing. You're ready to go. It's going to make you more efficient, which is going to make you more effortless and more profitable. So with that said, we want you to pretend that your business is the prototype for 5,000 more businesses that are going to be just like it. Now, that's whether you want to franchise or you want to stay in a business of one. So what you're going to start doing is creating that standard operating procedures manual for everything you do. So any function that you repeat, you should start creating SOPs for. So this is what's going to take us from infancy into this mature business format. So here are the rules. The model that you're creating will provide consistent value to your customers, employees, suppliers, and lenders beyond what they expect. That's the whole point of you being in business, right? If you can't provide something that's consistently of value, nobody's going to come to you. Secondly, the model should be able to be operated by people with the lowest possible level of skill. Now, here's something that I ran into when Jarvis and I were talking about this. I said, Jarvis, if I'm looking at someone doing video editing, I can't just grab Joe Schmo off the street and try to teach them video editing. It's going to be a waste of time. And what he reminded me of is it's the lowest possible skill level for that skill. So for video editing, they at least have to have a base level of skill of video editing, especially if that's not your skill. They need to be good at that, but maybe they're not Steven Spielberg. And the reason why you want people with the lowest possible level of skill necessary is that highly skilled people, technicians, are very expensive and they're very hard to find. Remember, Henry Ford, in creating the assembly line, you had to be an engineer to build a car, but you could be Joe Schmo off the street to turn a crank or screw in a single bolt. That's what we're looking for, is breaking apart things into individual components that are replicatable. Third, the author talks about impeccable order. There's so much chaos, and it's funny, he was writing this back in a time when he was referring to TV delivering us the chaos around the world. But as far as the world today, with social media, we have it even worse. So you want to create impeccable order because you want to be a place that people feel safe at. Starbucks, whether you go to a Starbucks here or in Beijing, China, if you order a caramel macchiato, you're going to get the same exact drink prepared the same way with the same service, and it's going to taste the same. And the author talked about getting a haircut, and this guy gave him good haircuts, but it was different experience every time. And by the third or fourth time, it threw him off, and he just decided he didn't want to go back because he didn't feel safe. He didn't feel like he knew what he was going to get, even though it continued to be a good haircut. Fourth, and we already talked about it, everything in your model needs to be documented, needs to be written down, whether you're following it or someday whether you want to give that up to someone else. Fifth, it will be uniformly predictable. And we just talked about this. The customer's experience should be the same every time, whether you're doing it every time. Like, that was the sad part, is with the author, he was getting a haircut from the same person, but it was a different experience. So you want a uniformly predictable service, whether you're doing it, whether it's your cold calling or marketing or delivery of a product, or you're consulting, whether you're a doctor and your appointments are the same. Your customers want the same experience, even if it's not caviar and wine. If it's a good experience but it's consistent, that's much better, if it's something you can duplicate. And finally, he kind of gets into the weeds here, I think, on talking about uniform color, dress, and facilities. and talks about psychology of color. You know what? When you get there, do it. But I've seen too many people get hung up on spending their time tweaking logos and tweaking phrases and never actually doing something. Don't get so caught up on the details that you don't just, put out a marketing product or put out a logo. Change it later, but keep moving. So I am a little bit at odds with the author on that. All right, so time for you to ponder if you're alone, and also discuss if you're in one of our masterminds. How can I get my business to work without me? What things can I farm out? How can I get my people to work without my interference? Remember, in the book, he talks about how these different business owners started to farm things out to people, but then the people didn't do the things the way they wanted, and they ended up having to go in and correct everything and do even more work. How can I systematize my business so it could be replicated thousands of times? That's that documentation. How can I own my business and still be free of it? And that's where we all want to get to, is where if you choose to, you can take a break. You can be gone a week or a month or a year, and your business keeps going. And finally, and this is the big one, this is what it's really come down to. How can I spend my time doing the work I love? So I don't have to fire myself from the business, but I can do just the things that I enjoy rather than the work I have to. All right, heroes, thanks so much for watching this video. If you're in a group, start your discussion time. If not, leave some comments below. Appreciate you, and we'll talk to you soon.